Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're talking about the 2016 movie Central Intelligence. The movie starts in a high school. Robbie is taking a shower in the boys' locker room when a group of bullies grabs him. At the same time, in the school gym, everyone is cheering for Calvin. It's their last school assembly and Calvin is the popular student. Everyone likes him. But then, everything changes. The bullies drag a naked Robbie into the gym in front of the whole school. People laugh, but Calvin and his girlfriend Maggie don't. Calvin feels bad and gives Robbie his jacket so he can cover himself before running away. 20 years pass. Calvin, who was voted most likely to succeed, isn't living the life he hoped for. He works as a basic accountant and doesn't enjoy it. During lunch with Maggie, now his wife, Calvin looks sad. Nearby, his coworkers celebrate someone's promotion, which makes him feel worse. Maggie tries to cheer him up by showing him dress ideas for their 20-year school reunion, but Calvin says he doesn't want to go. This hurts Maggie. She feels he thinks their life is a failure, and they argue a little. Back at work, Calvin goes on Facebook. He sees a post about the reunion and then gets a friend request from someone named Bob Stone. He doesn't know the name, but he accepts it. Right then, his phone rings. It's Maggie. Calvin apologizes for their talk earlier. Maggie suggests they try couples therapy. Calvin says they don't need it, but while she explains, Calvin starts getting texts from Bob Stone. Bob says he's in town for the reunion and wants to meet. Calvin asks who he really is. Bob then reveals he is actually Robbie from high school. Calvin is shocked. Robbie, now calling himself Bob, asks him to hang out that night. Calvin tells Maggie he already has plans. When he says the name Bob Stone, Maggie thinks it sounds fake, so Calvin explains it's actually Robbie. At first she doesn't remember, but when it comes back to her she agrees and says she will move the therapy appointment. Calvin goes to a bar and meets a huge man he doesn't know. The man introduces himself as Bob Stone, also known as Robbie. Calvin is surprised by how much he has changed. As they talk, Calvin notices Bob acting a little odd. They talk about their jobs, and Bob says he used to work as a contractor for the government, but got fired. Bob offers to get drinks and convinces Calvin to wait. While Bob is gone, another man tries to take Calvin's seat. Calvin tries to defend himself, but quickly backs off. Bob comes back and beats the man badly. Then Bob and Calvin run out of the bar. Later, they visit their old high school. Bob remembers all the awful things that happened to him there. Calvin also feels sad because his life isn't what he expected. Bob tries to lift his mood and tells him to try the backflip he was famous for and won't stop until Calvin does it. But when Calvin tries, he fails completely. They go to Calvin's house. Bob says he needs help with a parole issue. Calvin agrees, but he doesn't really get what Bob is asking. He checks Bob's laptop and finds millions of dollars in hidden accounts around the world. Suddenly, the computer starts acting strange. Bob spills beer on it by mistake, and the laptop dies. Then Bob asks if he can stay the night, and Calvin says yes. Later, Calvin walks into a room that looks like someone attacked it. He hears knocking at the door and goes to see who it is. It's the CIA. Calvin tells them he has talked to Bob and that Bob is on the couch, but when they check the living room, it's perfectly clean, and Bob is gone. Calvin asks what is going on. The agents tell him that Bob is wanted for murder and treason. They say he has stolen government secrets and might sell them to enemy countries. They ask Calvin to tell them everything he knows about Bob Stone. The word agent surprises Calvin. He never knew Bob worked for the CIA. Calvin tries to explain that he doesn't know much about Bob, but they show him that Bob put Calvin down as his emergency contact everywhere. Now, Calvin feels like this old classmate has dragged him into something very serious. He tries to tell the truth, but Agent Harris thinks his nervous behavior means he is hiding something. She tells him to prove he is not working with Bob. Calvin says he needs a moment. At Calvin's office, everyone is watching the situation. Maggie calls Agent Harris, who answers while Calvin is still talking. Maggie also asks about their therapy appointment, and Calvin hangs up fast. Maggie gets upset. She wants to start a family. Agent Harris, who is trained to read people, notices how stressed Calvin is. He is clearly overwhelmed. Suddenly, Bob calls Calvin and says he is in trouble and hiding near the stairs. Agent Harris and her team rush to find him, and they tell Calvin to stay hidden in his office. When Bob shows up, he pretends he doesn't know what is going on, acting like the plan was only to get the CIA out of the building. Calvin keeps asking for answers, but Bob won't say anything. Instead, he pulls off Calvin's tie. Calvin asks again what is happening. Bob calls an Uber, but still doesn't explain much. Then he asks Calvin if he is in or out. Calvin says he is out, but Bob says it doesn't matter because he is already part of it. Bob climbs onto a desk and ties Calvin's tie to the sprinkler. Calvin keeps saying he wants out. Bob says all right, then sets the tie on fire and tells Calvin the only way out is to go in. Bob hands Calvin a gun, but Calvin panics and runs, shouting that Bob is in the building. The whole office watches as Bob tackles Calvin to the floor. Bob tells them Calvin is a hostage. Just then, the agents rush in. Bob starts shooting and fights the CIA agents. Calvin tries to escape, but ends up trapped inside a mail cart. Bob beats the agents easily, but one manages to put a chain around his neck. Bob calls to Calvin for help. Calvin grabs a gun but doesn't know what to do. He struggles with another agent and accidentally fires the gun, hitting the man choking Bob. That saves Bob. Another agent tries to arrest Calvin, but Bob knocks the man out, puts Calvin back into the mail cart, and runs toward the exit. At the door, a group of agents, including Agent Harris, are waiting. Calvin tries to talk his way out, but Harris tells him to surrender. Bob causes a distraction when the sprinklers go off. He throws a flash bomb, breaks a window, and jumps out with Calvin, landing on a big gorilla statue. With agents shooting at them, Calvin has no choice but to jump into the Uber with Bob. As they drive away, Bob explains everything. He says he is a government advisor, and someone stole secret codes that control the entire U.S. spy network. The codes are about to be sold, and if that happens, enemy attacks cannot be stopped. Bob says he needs Calvin's help to find out where the trade will happen. It's the last piece he needs, but Calvin refuses. He begs Bob to pull over. Bob stops the car, saying it's to go off the grid and stay hidden. Calvin tries to speak calmly and tells Bob he just wants to go home, but Bob reminds him that they are both wanted now, so they have to clear their names first. Calvin, frustrated, says the agents told him Bob stole the codes, but Bob denies it. He says Agent Harris is trying to frame him for something he never did. Bob explains that he and his old partner Phil were on a mission together. They were tracking someone called Black Badger, a dangerous person, to a fancy apartment. But when they split up in the elevator, Phil was killed. Bob says he tried to save him, but he was too late. As they continue driving, a man on a motorbike suddenly attacks. He speeds toward them and hits Bob in the face with a tire. Bob quickly recovers, grabs a metal pipe, and throws it into the motorcycle's wheel, making the attacker crash. Calvin sees the empty bike and decides this is his chance to escape. He jumps on it and rides away, leaving Bob to finish the fight. While on the run, Calvin calls Maggie and asks to meet. She tells him to come to the therapist's office instead of home. Calvin tries to sound normal, but she knows something is wrong. When he arrives at the therapist's office, Agent Harris grabs him and forces him into a van. Inside, she tells Calvin she believes he isn't part of any crime. She asks about Bob's partner, and Calvin says the Black Badger killed him. Then Harris gives him shocking news. She says Bob is the Black Badger.
Oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, man.
She tells a different story, saying Bob didn't lose his partner. He betrayed him. She also says Bob can't sell the stolen codes without Calvin's help. Since Calvin is the only person Bob trusts, they want to use him to catch Bob. Harris gives Calvin a small tracking device. If he presses the button, the CIA will find Bob right away. Calvin is terrified. Later, Calvin meets Bob again and pretends they are continuing therapy with Maggie, but he clearly wants to leave. Maggie is confused and upset. She insists he stay and talk. The session becomes strange as Bob starts acting like the therapist. Calvin wants to run out of the room, but Maggie thinks the chaos means Calvin is finally opening up. When Calvin tries to leave again, Maggie misunderstands. She thinks he is giving up on their relationship. She says she had nothing to do with any of this trouble and walks out. Bob tells Calvin he forgives him and says once they fix everything, they will save the world. Calvin doesn't believe it. He pulls out the tracking button and threatens to press it. Bob tries to calm him and says he is fighting on the right side. After a moment, Calvin finally agrees to help. Their next stop is Trevor, their old high school bully. Trevor is the only person who can give them the transaction number they need. At Trevor's workplace, Bob tries to stay calm, but it's clear Trevor still bothers him. Trevor acts polite, pretending he has changed. He greets them with a friendly smile. Before Bob can even speak, Trevor hands over the numbers. Then he gives a fake apology and says he has found God, but his real attitude comes out fast. He tells Bob he doesn't regret anything he did in the past. He even says he is proud of it. He starts mocking Bob all over again. Calvin is shocked but stays quiet, thinking Bob will deal with it. Bob quietly shuts down and walks out. Calvin looks at Trevor and says, "You're an asshole," then leaves with the transaction number. Right after, Agent Harris calls Calvin. She warns him that Maggie will be charged with conspiracy if he doesn't follow orders. Her voice is cold. She tells Calvin to bring Bob outside and prepare for the agents to arrive. Outside, Bob tries to be honest. He apologizes for everything and says Calvin was the only one who was kind to him in school. He says he doesn't have many friends and promises he would never turn against Calvin. Calvin then says the painful truth. He apologizes and admits he told Agent Harris where they are. At that exact moment, the CIA rushes in and arrests both of them. Handcuffed and separated, Calvin is overwhelmed with guilt. From another room, he hears Bob being tortured. It's too much. Calvin suddenly fights back. He knocks out a guard, takes his gun, and forces the others to give him a key card. With the guard tied up, Calvin goes to find Bob. Inside the room, Bob is bruised but smiles when Calvin enters. Bob quickly handcuffs Agent Harris instead. Outside the room, Calvin tries talking to Bob. Bob still claims he's not some great spy, only Robbie Weirdick, the bullied kid. But Calvin tells him he's not that person anymore. He says Bob Stone may be a fake name, but he turned the nickname Golden Jet from something embarrassing into something strong. Calvin says he can do the same with his name. This finally gets through to Bob. They shake hands, but Calvin notices Bob's finger is bent and knows they must hurry. They escape together. Calvin gets caught up in the action, fighting agents even though he's not trained. He forgets he's breaking the law, too. At the exit, Calvin tries the key card, but it doesn't work. Bob then slams an agent against the scanner with a gun to his head. The door opens, and they run. They steal a car and drive off fast. In the car, Bob gives Calvin a phone and tells him to enter the codes. A map appears showing the meeting spot. It's in Boston, but they need a plane. At a small airport, Bob pulls a tiny plane out of a hangar while Calvin keeps a security guard busy. It looks suspicious, but they manage to get the plane in the air. During the flight, Calvin starts thinking. He begins to suspect that Agent Harris might be the real Black Badger. When they land near the meeting area, he feels something is off. The place is too open. He notices a parking garage and guesses the real meeting is happening underneath. Bob says they should split up. Calvin refuses and tells him to call if anything goes wrong. Bob goes into the garage. It feels like he is walking into a trap. At the same time, Calvin sees Harris arriving. Curious and worried, he follows her. Below ground, everything falls apart. Bob meets the buyer and is about to hand over the drive when Phil, his partner who was supposed to be dead, steps out. Phil reveals he is the real Black Badger. Calvin arrives and overhears Bob saying he is the Black Badger. Just then, they notice Calvin and Bob immediately shoots him. The bullet grazed Calvin's neck, making him bleed from the neck. Calvin is confused as both Bob and Phil claim they are the Black Badger. Harris storms in and starts shooting at everyone. In the chaos of the shootout, Calvin spots the encrypted drives on the ground. Even though he knows it's a terrible idea, he grabs them and runs. Bullets whiz past him as he sprints to safety, but one of the enemy buyers is now hot on his trail. Just when it looks like Calvin is about to be hit by an oncoming car, Bob swoops in and saves him again.
I mean, this is crazy, right?
You stay the hell away from me, Bob! You shot me in the neck!
Calvin makes it onto the bridge, sprinting with his heart pounding, when Bob finally catches up. But before anything can be resolved, Phil appears again. Both men shout over each other, each insisting they're the innocent one. The tension spikes, and then they both open fire. Terrified and confused, Calvin pulls a pistol and shoots Bob in the shoulder. Then he swings the gun toward Phil and yells for him not to move. When he pulls the trigger, the gun clicks empty. With nothing else to use, Calvin throws the rifle at Phil. Phil catches it effortlessly, reloads without hesitation, and smirks. He mocks Calvin, saying Bob could never be the Black Badger and was always too soft and too weak. That's when everything becomes clear. The night Phil supposedly died, none of it was real. He had staged everything, framed Bob, and used the situation to disappear. Phil's resentment had simmered for years, and now he was here to finish what he started. Phil orders Calvin onto his knees. Instead, Calvin tries to perform his signature golden jet flip from high school. He fails the landing, but the sudden move distracts Phil long enough for Bob to strike from behind, ripping out his trachea.
Oh, you just pulled his throat out!
And sending Phil's body into the river below. There's no time to process what just happened. They still need to deliver the flash drives to Agent Harris. When they meet her, Harris thanks them and even offers Calvin a position at the CIA if he ever wants a change of pace. Maggie walks over and demands to know what's going on. Bob introduces himself and finally explains the truth about the secret CIA mission. Calvin tells Maggie that being with her is what matters most to him, and they kiss. Bob prepares to leave, but Calvin asks him to stay for the reunion. When it's time to announce the homecoming king and queen, Bob walks toward the stage, looking unsure of himself. Trevor spots him and seizes the moment to insult him again. Bob apologizes, but Trevor pushes him. Bob responds with a punch. Afterward, he gives a heartfelt speech thanking Calvin for being the one person who ever treated him with kindness. And then out of nowhere, Bob strips naked on stage. The crowd surprisingly loves it and cheers him on. Even the girl he had a crush on in high school approaches him, flirts, and ends up kissing him. The reunion becomes the wildest one anyone has ever seen. Later, it's revealed that Maggie is pregnant. Bob waits outside as Calvin prepares for his first day with the CIA. As a final gift, Bob gives him his old high school blazer. The story ends with the two of them driving into the sunset together. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for watching.